Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the next of our Essential series. These are topical, engaging, and technical webinars on wealth and wellness by leaders in the private client world. This afternoon, I'm pleased to welcome Jess Miller, founder of Strello Advisory, to share an introduction to investigations in asset recovery. I'm Lottie, founder of the Jura Society, network and private client consultancy, focusing on women, wealth, and wellness. But today, Jess is going to be looking into a deeper dive into what investigators do, when to call them, and how to work with them. As always, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. Otherwise, enjoy. I'm just going to bring Jess in now. Hi, Jess. Over to you.
Thank you. So can you pop my slide up, Lottie? Thank you. So as Lottie says, I'm doing an introduction to investigations and asset recovery. So I'm broadly going to cover what investigators do and when and why you should call us, and then move into a bit of a deeper dive on asset recovery, principally because it is the area of investigations that I get asked about most frequently and sort of comprises the greatest part of my practice area. So I have started this with probably the most overused visual metaphor for investigations, which is the puzzle and the puzzle pieces. It's up there with, I think, a telescope and probably a chess piece, but there is method and meaning to this, which is really the fundamental purpose of an investigator is to bring information and clarity and fill in the gaps in knowledge in areas where that will bolster your or your client's position, that will provide clarity in uncertain circumstances, unpick a situation that you're unsure about, or help prove or disprove a hypothesis, for example, within a fraud case. So if there's one thing that I would want you all to take away when you think, well, what do investigators do? And like, what is the point of us? Is really that it is to fill in the gaps in your information. But when do you call us? In real terms, it kind of goes into two separate set of circumstances, before and after, or if you will, pre-event and post-event. The pre-event is when you are needing information or a kind of compliance check on something before you decide to go ahead and make that decision. Generally speaking, it will be due diligence before, joint ventures or certain investments, where we will be working, say, quite closely with deal teams or with compliance teams or general counsel on identifying compliance and regulatory issues, understanding sanctions exposure, or contextualizing political exposure if you've got, perhaps say within a shareholder structure, how certain licenses were obtained, if there is any allegation of, wrongdoing or sort of iniquity on, on the side of the person or the entity that you want to invest with, to really bottom that out and, look at adverse press reporting and try and understand the extent to which, that is true and how serious an issue it will be. In the pre-event, one would also put in the source of wealth reporting for private clients. So a lot of due diligence is considered to be, on the part of the person looking at someone else. But with private clients, there is also that use from a kind of introspective and reputational defense perspective. If you are, for example, moving your banking relationships or setting up a family office in a new jurisdiction or being onboarded by an institution, then having a full source of wealth report for you puts you in a significantly better position for taking that step. The afterwards, so the post-event, is effectively where something has gone really wrong and you want to understand what that is, maybe why it happened, and then also what can be done about it. So asset recovery fits within this sort of post-event situation. And that will be things like fraud investigations, asset recovery, I'll come to it under a variety of different circumstances, adverse media reporting allegations that have been made about you. And then investigators will be working with a group of advisors on that crisis management, and that information, evidence, intelligence plugs into that overall kind of crisis management strategy. But asset recovery. Asset recovery is identifying what your counterparty owns, where they own it, and how they own it. And within investigations, the thing that I really like about it, and I can geek out about asset recovery all day, is that it is so malleable and you can use it within many different kind of areas of disputes, be that on the private client side, on the personal side, so divorce and inheritance, but through to the commercial litigation, international arbitration, investor state cases, so where you're looking at the assets that are owned by a state. It's really scalable. It's a very, it's a sort of discipline within investigations that has huge kind of applicability across the board. But where I've broken it down for you all today, so you can kind of take this away with you, is there really are these 4 areas where asset recovery fits in really neatly and will be adjusted ever so slightly according to those circumstances. On the commercial side, you've got commercial litigation and arbitration. So asset recovery plugs into the life cycle of a dispute. It can be used at the beginning of proceedings to understand if there is even any value in filing a claim. The worst thing is in litigation, if you go file a claim, you go all the way through the legal process, you get to the end, you get a judgment, and the other side doesn't have any assets. You are walking around with a beautiful bit of paper, expertly written by our high court judges, and it is effectively worthless. You don't want that. So asset recovery, even a very quick scoping exercise to identify some assets, some leads on assets, that gives you that kind of security at the beginning of the process that it is worthwhile, that you are going to get your judgment, recover your costs. It's totally worthwhile. It then down the line of litigation will be used for interim injunctions, so you're freezing orders. What are you going to freeze? Voila, asset recovery, you can find that. And lastly, in enforcement. So that's when you've got your judgment, you've got your arbitral award, and the other side hasn't paid, and this is where you need to go after their assets, wherever they may be. What in litigation and arbitration, it may be slightly different from some of the other areas that I've highlighted on this little diagram, is that you are working against a quantum. There will be a claim, a monetary claim that you have against the other side, and that is the amount that you are looking for, maybe plus an adjustment for costs. And that may not be if you have a company on the other side, if you have a high net worth or ultra high net worth on the other side. That may not be the entirety of everything that they own. You just need a portion of it. And it gives you that flexibility in looking at the jurisdictions that have a better legal system, at looking at assets that are more easy to enforce again, or something that, if at the end of the day you've got it, it's going to be something that you can, for example, divest more easily than something else, like shares in a company or a property in Knightsbridge, for example. Whereas, for example, if we're looking at divorce or inheritance disputes, and divorce generally comes along where there is a lack of clarity over what generally the wealthier party owns, where they've got it, and how they own it, and some suspicion that they have lied or omitted things on their e-form. Inheritance disputes, again, is that question of, well, I've been told that this is what I'm entitled to, but is that actually, what does the entire estate look like? Or where somebody has very, may even have just left things out of their will. What else out there is there in the world that could possibly be put into the estate? Or, instances where the executor has effectively defrauded one of the parties and not kind of given them their due inheritance. What you need is that overview of sort of the everything, because that's the way that then you can work back and understand what it is that you truly are entitled to. Ditto fraud, all the assets that were acquired through this whatever fraud or kind of internal wrongdoing or siphoning off of funds out of a family office, wherever it is, has happened, that can be recovered. So in sum, rambling a bit, but those different areas where you can use asset recovery, and what an investigator will do is adjust the strategy according to the circumstances, the legal forum in which it's taking place, and what it is that you're also needing to achieve through that investigation. And then lastly, because this is asset recovery, what's an asset? So like an asset is effectively something that someone owns, as I put, that can be used for payment of a debt. And it's really diverse. Within different investigations, you can come across all different sorts of assets. And what makes each investigation really interesting is that what one would consider an asset and what one would be looking for is really inextricably linked to who the counterparty is. So if you're looking at a company, for example, you'd be looking at anything from, do they own the offices that they're sat in, through to intellectual property, because that has a value, amounts that are owing to that company, what contracts have they got out there, are they importing anything that could be seized in the port when it arrives. So it's the company, and then also say the industry in which that company is operating will also then help you define what assets are and what you're looking for. Whereas when you're looking at a person, even if they are, if you're looking at 5 high net worth individuals, there are loads of factors also that will go into where you're looking for their assets. And that can be heavily influenced by nationality, for example, or where you're resident, because then that has a knock-on effect on the offshore structures that you are using. If you look at Russians, for example, the traditional ownership structure for a Russian asset is Russia, Cyprus, British Virgin Islands. South American high net worths favor Miami. There are different legacy treaties, for example, between the Netherlands and then the usage of the Dutch Antilles for structuring also has its own history to it. And that makes it really interesting. As an investigator, if you're looking at asset recovery a lot, you need to understand both how to run an investigation, the nuts and bolts of an asset recovery investigation, but then also the cultural overlay which goes on top, which really does inform where people like to buy assets, where you have your summer house, where you are going to, I don't know, have your banking relationships, where you are going to moor your yacht, where you might keep your private jets, where your kids are going to school, that maybe you end up getting a weekend property somewhere near where they are. There are all of these really personal, culturally linked elements which go into defining what an asset is within the context of any one investigation. And what I would would add on top of that is when we are looking at assets, investigators, there are, again, a couple of factors that go into it. So if you can imagine that at the end of your first phase of investigation, you have what looks like a giant map of what somebody owns and where it is and how it's linked to them, how much we've been able to prove that. What you're faced with is then the blueprint for the next step of your legal strategy. And the assets within that, then we're looking at them, okay, in terms of jurisdiction, where are they? What's the value of them? Are we going to get most of our claim back on, through a property or through a super yacht or a piece of artwork? And then you're also looking at the leverage, so the strategic value also of an asset, which can be, okay, maybe it's not the most monetarily valuable asset, but it has a strategic advantage to it. It is designed to make the other person come to the table and negotiate and decide, okay, let's dispense with, this. We're not going to come after anything else, but you're going to pay up what you owe us. I think this was tried a little bit, if I'm right, in the very famous Akhmedov divorce with the yacht being seized in Dubai. So there is that strategic move to keep hold of an asset, both for kind of monetary perspective, but also a strategic perspective. So I think I've probably, hopefully wasn't talking too fast, given you a whirlwind tour of what asset recovery is, why we do it, and when we do it. But happy to take any questions, to go back to any of the earlier slides, if there is something that you would like me to drill down into further. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jess. What a brilliant overview. And actually, I think that analogy of, creating a map, it's almost like a treasure map, which you have to do first, and doing your due diligence ahead of engaging any litigators does make sense. So I imagine a lot of people don't do that.
It's interesting. I think with my clients, the private clients tend to come and they want asset recovery before they want to go and engage litigators and start that process. Maybe they have been through litigation previously, so this is not new to them, or they want to have an understanding of where all of the assets are, because what they're going to try and do is kind of negotiate in the first instance, but they want to know what the levers are. So there is that, or they're then going to go and decide where it is that they want to, or try and get jurisdiction for a dispute based on what they've found. The other side will be, I get called up by a litigator or a family lawyer, and they're already way into the process, but something's come up where you think, okay, is the other side lying, or we want to try and do X, Y, and Z thing as part of our legal strategy, but we need to know what the assets are. So I get a little bit of both. But yes, if more clients right at the outset of that legal process took the step to see what was out there, it might save a world of pain.
Yeah, well, pain and cost, I think, as well.
Yeah, they tend to go hand in hand.
Yes. I guess one of the other questions that's popped up is really, what are some of the sticking points or hurdles? Because this isn't an easy exercise, although you have delivered what is in an incredibly immaculate overview. Things, as we know, don't always go as smoothly as you might hope. What do you experience in this?
So there are some of the hurdles which are also the reasons why investigators exist, and are kind of where our value add sits. And one of them will be the use of offshore jurisdictions, and that is simply because the very limited public reporting requirements in most offshore jurisdictions, that you are not going to see who the ultimate beneficial owner is, you're not going to see who the shareholders are, and on paper, you follow the trail of this company is owned by this company, is owned by this company, is owned by this, and you get to the top and you're basically smacking your head into a wall, because you've got to this locked box that, short of getting disclosure in wherever that ultimate holding company is, you were like, okay, well, what do I do with this? But so that's when you start looking for all of the kind of other evidence and the kind of ancillary information around it. You may not be able to crack a structure right at the top, but when you've got companies in between, you can start putting together more contextual information. You can start seeing, okay, well, who is using a property? Are the directors linked to a offshore incorporation agency, or are they ones that have been personally appointed by the person that we think is the UBO? So you start looking, it's like that thing of you can't get to it directly. So you think, well, how do I go around this or under this, or build up a bank of compelling evidence? So there's that. One of the reasons why doing asset recovery right at the beginning of a litigation is so important is dissipation. So that's people shifting their assets during the course of a dispute, so you don't have to hand them over. And you saw that again, Akhmedov, with the son. So the assets go to the son, so he's going to hold them like, nice guy, and out of the reach, ideally, of mum. And that also happens in commercial litigation as well. And then if you do this at the end and somebody's dissipated assets, it's still entirely doable. It's just a longer investigation because you're trying to take a historic snapshot and then follow the trail of where all of this stuff has gone and who's got it now. If you take that picture right at the beginning and you're in protracted proceedings over years, you've still got it. So at the end, you can fill in the blanks if you think that certain assets have disappeared over time. So that's the other thing. So again, like in both instances, they're not insurmountable hurdles, and they're certainly the ones where investigators, add value. If people behaved well, you wouldn't need us, but they don't. So
yeah, well, and that's usually why you've got a litigator as well, because people just won't communicate. Or be honest, there's always going to be a sticking point with these kind of conflicts. Okay, and then we've got that wonderful, wonderful asset class, crypto. Everybody talks about it. What are you seeing in terms of recovery? Is it possible?
So yes, there are ways of identifying an individual's relationship with all the cryptocurrency that they've acquired. So I would say within my investigations and the cases that I'm working on, crypto is less desirable than other assets. So there's still in seeing quite a preference for traditional assets, tangible assets, things you can see more easily, that you can demonstrate the ownership of more easily. The issues around crypto, things like demonstrating that the other side has got crypto, that's the first one. Simply because it's so difficult to link somebody to a wallet. If you've got their bank statements and disclosure, and you can see that the money is being paid out to a platform, then you've got that starting point. But if you're sat on the outside, kind of with absolutely nothing to go on other than someone saying, well, I think they might have crypto, that makes it much more difficult. Whereas, for example, if someone says, I think they might have a house in a neighborhood, you can at bare minimum get the title deed of every single house in that neighborhood. And I know that because I've made an analyst do it once. Like, it is entirely possible to do that. So yeah, so on crypto, there are ways forward with it, but what I have seen is still a preference where possible to go after the kind of more traditional static name stamped on it assets.
And the same, I suppose, with art as well. What are you finding in that world? Because that can be a little bit murky too, can't it?
Yeah, I don't touch art particularly often. I think, again, because of sometimes the difficulty in linking, somebody's ownership to a piece of artwork, other than in the public domain, it may be stated that, export something, or if you've got a source that has a right to that information and they're able to say, okay, well, we think that this happened. But beyond that, there are some notable cases of it happening. So there's a big dispute amongst the Agnelli family in Italy at the moment, where I think it's considered that artwork was taken out of the estate that one party should have inherited, that was put into a lockup in Switzerland. An investigator did track it down, and then they opened that lockup and it had gone. I'm not sure I did need to check on the next bit. But again, that's from kind of, I think, insider information within the family. They've seen it on the walls. There was one party who knew that art should have existed and could have gone somewhere. But there are specialist consultancies and even like specialist investigators who focusing kind of on the artwork. If you're on the outside and you don't have your client doesn't have a personal relationship with the other side that own that artwork, then it's very difficult from nothing to know that someone had that big art collection, unless they've put it into a museum, handed out on loan, gone to the papers for it, something like that would give you the in.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And again, it is a very mystical world as well anyway. So there's very little that you can do on the outside. But let's go back to just exploring a little bit more and elaborating on how you actually work with lawyers. So let's take the example of divorces, for instance. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just sort of like run through what it would look like in an ideal world if you were working with somebody through a divorce?
Yeah, so within the context of divorce, where family lawyer would bring me in is either that there has been the declaration of assets and it doesn't add up, or there are things that the client remembers their spouse talking about, or that they said that they were going to acquire, or a business deal that they were involved in, or there is some discrepancy between what has been put down on paper and what the client thinks the real situation is. Because you can find that you've got somebody on the other side who over a period of time has been restructuring their assets and shuffling some of them out of sight. There's a case of a Russian oligarch called Dmitry Rublyev, and he did that. And then in the I think it was Panama Papers, so the Mossack Fonseca leak, all of these emails between him and his offshore company in Panama, where he was saying, I'm going to divorce my wife. He wanted to move an art collection, and he was saying, how can I restructure this so she's not going to find anything? Because he's got, he's several years lead up to deciding to file for divorce, and he's moving his stuff around so that it's very difficult to get at. So anyway, going back, lawyers will either come in at this point where you just think, okay, I think the other side is lying, and then if we are just going with what's on paper, then my client is going to get a lot less than he or she is entitled to. Or it's right at the end where you've got your divorce, there is an order against the other side to pay a certain amount, to hand over certain property, whatever it is, and they're not doing it. There's like voluntary non-compliance, and that is also then much like a litigation. Then you're going into enforcement, which is, okay, you owe me X amount of money, so we're going to go and find your assets wherever they are and seize them to the value of what it is that you owe. So that will be, right at the end of the proceedings. And really, when you do it, it will be the circumstances, it will be at the discretion of the lawyers, but then ultimately, whether I'm brought in or not, fundamentally, sits with the client at the top to decide whether they think it's worthwhile or not.
And then in terms of enforcement, is that something that you then okay, so in my head, I'm like, you send around the heavies. I'm sure it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. How do you actually enforce the, reclaiming of assets?
Yeah, weirdly, it's not me with a baseball bat and Alsatian and my winning smile.
Please, would you do this now?
Yeah, however, what would the word be? Like compelling that may be. No, enforcement is very, very legal, both in the sense of working within the bounds of the law, and also that it is a legal process, less Alsatians, less baseball bats, less intimidation. So that is then you are needing to find assets. From an investigative point of view, what is needed in enforcement is that real evidence. So when I was talking about that big map at the beginning, quite often that will be what is available in the public record. All of our leads, and then where, okay, some assets you'll get out and out because someone's put their name on it. Other times you've got all of these weird sort of holding structures and trusts and stuff popping up. And in enforcement, it's really focused on evidence. The lawyers will decide which assets they want to go after, and that will, a big factor in that will be what can really be proven, to the point where a judge in another jurisdiction is going to go, yeah, okay, we think that the X owns that, rather than having, your nice like roadmap for the future. This is that title deed, those source inquiries, that affidavit that says this is whatever, this holding company belongs to this person because we know, because we saw this person using the house, or whatever it is, that you're focused on gathering court ready evidence in those instances.
Brilliant. Wow, thank you. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to just share as a closing remark at all.
Yeah, I would say, like, if you have concerns about something, and you want to hash out whether or not an investigation would be appropriate, looking at your likely costs for doing so, reach out back to me or any kind of anyone in my industry. I think previously the way that we've been talked about in the press, we only get mentioned when things go badly wrong. But if we are a bit of a closed industry. We don't see quite the light of day in the same way that lawyers do, or bankers, or whoever else you've got, advisory panel. If investigators are spoken about, it's normally they're like, oh, they're in the shadows. We're not in the shadows. I very much like the sunshine, and so with my factor 50, we are an approachable industry. We are coming out more and more into the fore because it is becoming more of there as more of a profession really than it has been in previous years, and because of that, one can approach an investigator directly and say, this is what happened, what do you think? So I think that's the thing, is that we're here, we're more easily identifiable now, easier to track down. So if you've got something that's really niggling you, then talk to us.
Brilliant there. And yeah, lovely comment there from Deborah saying, great top line summary. Thanks, Jess. And yes, I agree. So yeah, if anybody watching this does want to reach out to Jess, either, go to her directly, or if you want to come via me, absolutely fine. But yeah, I think it's a really fascinating world and so much needed as well, with us all being a lot more global as well, having somebody like Jess who can actually cross those jurisdictions and bring a team together on a global scale to help do the investigation work is just key. So thank you so much, Jess, for sharing that. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in now and watching this on the replay as well.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.